Hello fellow artists, today we are going to be doing a beginner's watercolor apple step by step. So break out those paints and let's get started. All right, here we go. After I do just a light sketch with a graphite pencil, I apply clean water. Now this doesn't look very clean, but I purposely added a little color so you can see it in the camera. Make sure not to get that highlight there. I'm going around the highlight, not getting any water in there. That way I won't get any color in there. Now, letting the water soak in, I add my yellow and I have it ready to go. It's already activated with water because when you do this wet on wet technique, you kind of have to work quickly. You have to work fast. So you can see how wet the apple is now, or the paper is, because of the yellow is on there now. So the big trick with watercolors is to make sure that your brush is not as wet as the paper. So your brush doesn't have more water than your paper does, or not as wet as your paper, let's say. So you can see my red paint is pretty thick over there. If it was really watery, thinned out with a lot of water, it wouldn't be as dark on the apple as you would see. So see right there, it's thinning out with more water. So the color's a lot lighter, which is fine because I'm going to put brown on that side next anyway. So here we go. So I wanted the left side of the apple a really dark red, especially for the base layers. Now I'm doing a burnt sienna or a Van Dyke brown color. And again, it's pretty thick on my palette. So there, I let the apple dry completely. I'm adding some second layers to the apple so you can see how the red on the left, how much lighter that dried. That's because the paper was really wet when I applied the red color. Now the paper is dry and I'm applying the same consistency of red onto the paper, and it's going to stay a lot darker. It's not gonna lighten up as much as the first layers did. So that's why it's important to plan your layers out with watercolor. You work from light to dark and make sure that your layers are dried in between. If you like this video, please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps me make more for you. Thank you. Now there are some techniques that you can do when your paper is damp or your layers aren't quite as dry, but that's for later. If you're a total beginner, make sure that you dry your first layers before you put on your next layers. Now this is my second layer, so I'm going to add, now while everything is still wet, I'm adding the kind of this shadowy, darker part of the apple on the bottom, and that's just brown, a Van Dyke brown. Now everything is dry again. You can see the bottom part may be a little wet, but for the most part, the red and the yellows are completely dry. And I'm adding a third layer. And this layer, I'm being kind of careful with. I don't really want the colors to blend together as the first two layers. This layer, I want more detail. And you can see I'm kind of having fun with the brush. It's making these kind of pointy marks. It kind of looks like texture on the apple. And that's a little dry brushing there. So when your brush is wet, your paper is dry. Now it's the area that I just painted. I'm going over with a little darker color. That is Van Dyke brown or burnt sienna. And I'm barely tapping the paper. I'm barely touching it because I don't want to lift up the colors that are underneath. So this is really close to dry brushing. but not quite, because I do have, I would say, a medium wetness on my brush. So it's not super wet, it's not super dry. Now I'm getting in trying to get a little curve of the apple in. So I'm just kind of doing a shadow there. And that was just a brown, Van Dyke brown. And now I'm kind of blending a little bit, because I'm blending in the areas where it's wet and just letting the watercolor do its thing. So you can see my little pauses. I just kind of pause, see what the paint is going to do. Doing a little touch-ups here and there. Then after that dries, or while it dries, with clean water, I have a tissue in my hand, I soften the edges of the highlight. Now definitely practice on a scratch piece of paper first before doing this, and you want to preserve a little white in the highlight. Now I'm doing the shadow. This is brown. I think the Van Dyke brown, but any brown that you have will do. Then I add a blue right underneath the apple. Blue and brown mixed together make great shadow colors. And if you want a deeper color but not quite black, you can mix a blue and a brown, or a burnt sienna together and a blue. It just makes a really pretty deep brown color. And now I'm adding a little water to my brush and thinning out the paint and getting a kind of a shadow technique. So here I'm adding a little more blue. While the brown dried a little bit more, I'm adding some blue in there. And then I just leave it. I let it dry and see what happens. And adding a little white gouache to the stem there for some highlights. And here is the final apple. Thank you so much for watching, fellow artists, and I will see you soon for the Beginners Watercolor Summit right here on YouTube. Thank you. Bye.